The incident on Saturday will never make sense. Whether you knew these people personally or not, I know that the whole country right now is mourning. Everyone's devastated.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Life Uncut. I'm Laura.
And I'm Keisha.
And look, today's episode, we know you guys come here for the levity and for the lols, and sometimes you come here for more deep and introspective conversations, which happen from time to time, believe it or not. But today's episode feels really, really different, and I'm sure you guys are so aware of what happened in Bondi over the weekend. And if you aren't, or maybe you're an overseas listener, so the news hasn't reached you yet, on Saturday there was a mass murder that happened in Bondi Junction. A 40-year-old man walked into Bondi Junction shopping centre and went on, what's only been described as a stabbing spree. And as a result, 6 people were murdered and 11 people are still in hospital. Some of those people are in critical care. We know horrible things happen often in the world, and this feels very different for multiple reasons. One is because of the proximity. We live in Bondi. We are so close to Bondi Junction from the physical location of where we are, but also because of the proximity of friendships. And producer Keisha is friends with Ash, who was the mother who was murdered. And so we wanted to have a discussion today around what happened, but also around the media and the rush to report on information and whether that reporting is even factual or not. I know it's something that we see happen and it plays out really often when there are big tragedies that happen in the world. But I guess because of that proximity that I mentioned, this feels very different.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you have read about Ashley Good. She was 38 years old and she was the mother that died protecting her beautiful 9-month-old baby, Harriet. We became friends a couple of years ago. One of my closest childhood friends of over 2 decades is Ash's best friend. And everything that's being reported about her is completely true. She was human sunshine. She was just the most positive and grounded and funny and joy-filled beautiful, beautiful human being. And her proudest achievement and the thing that brought her the most joy was being a mum. You know, we spoke behind closed doors about whether we were even going to record today. I didn't know whether it was distasteful, and then I also felt like it was disrespectful not to, because I think the people who died on the weekend, they deserve to have the stories of who they were told, and they deserve to have the respect of the families who are grieving and the loved ones who are grieving at the moment. And I know that collectively across the country, everyone's heart broke over the weekend. I know that every single person is feeling a level of devastation that that's quite truly incomprehensible. And a lot of us are trying to make sense of it. And I think it's something that will never make sense. And to be completely honest, over the weekend, there were a couple of things that happened that I was really, really disappointed in terms of media. And I'm particularly speaking about the way that this was reported throughout the media.
Well, I think the thing that stood out to me the most, and I think for anyone who's been following the story, Ash has become the poster child of this horrific event. It's her face. It is Harriet's face that has become the most widely circulated. Their story is the story that people are most, I guess, invested in some ways. And that's a horrible thing to say, but the media has pushed that story out because the devastation of a mother being murdered whilst holding their baby, that gets more clicks than the rest of the people who were also murdered on that day. And I just want to read out the names of everybody. The 6 victims were Ishwen Chang, 27, Pikria Dacia, 55, Jade Young, 47, Dawn Singleton, 25, Faraz Tahir, 30 years old, and Ashley Good, 38. I guess the big thing I wanted to talk about off the back of this, and Keisha, I know that this is so personal for you, but
I also just really quickly want to say, I by no means whatsoever want to center myself in this tragedy. I want all of the sympathy to be given to the people who I think are deserving of it. And right now that is Ash's beautiful partner and her family and her friends, and the family and friends of the people who have tragically died, it's something that I feel is very important. And I definitely don't want to get on here and kind of take that light, if that makes sense. But I do think it's important that we talk about the way that this was reported, because something that caused a lot of distress for Ash's beautiful family was that without permission, photos of her and her daughter Harriet circulated pretty vastly across media outlets. And there's something that we need to learn here. There's something that we need to learn about these tragedies and when these circumstances happen. And I acknowledge the fact that this probably happens every single time a person is killed in this country. And unfortunately, that means it happens a lot more to women than what happens to men. Collectively, I know that we live in a society where we have this desire to have information immediately. We want to have faces and pictures immediately. We want to have information at our fingertips. And the immediacy of it, I think, is where we can get into some really murky territory.
Well, it's almost changed. Like the way in which people access information has changed. And I think it, to me, was like a real moment where I understood people now find out about their family members dying. They find out about their friends dying, not by receiving a knock on the door from police, but by finding out from the media or even by social media, because so many news articles repurpose the clickbaity headlines on social media. And it's the photo that's been pulled from LinkedIn, or it's the photo that's been pulled from someone's Instagram. And that's the notification of a death of a loved one. And now I want to be very clear about this, because this is not an isolated case. This is something that happens in any great tragedy. But I think more and more there's this almost media rush to be the first person to report on something. And something that really stood out was in this media frenzy to report on what was happening and to be the fastest and the first, which the only reason why media do this is to get the most engagement on the articles that they're producing. Channel 7's official 7 News Australia YouTube account, it's got over 1.6 million subscribers. It reported by Monique Wright and Michael Usher underneath a YouTube video with the wrong attacker's name. So they said that Benjamin Cohen was the murderer, incorrectly reporting who had actually murdered. It was the first time that a name had been released. And this person's name, Benjamin Cohen, circulated for over an hour online, all across Twitter, all across X, which just shows that it didn't really matter about the fact checking, and it was human error, as they've come out and said. But I mean, a human had to physically type in the wrong name in order to have that scoop first. I think the thing that we also saw, which is being, for me, I think really quite disturbing, is how many people have centered the tragedy around themselves in terms of their own proximity to Bondi Junction. I think so many of us would have seen people posting saying, that's the centre I visit, or I was only there yesterday, or, I go there with my daughter. And I understand the sentiment of that conversation. I understand the fear that a lot of people felt, because I felt it myself. But I think it's very different to mention that to someone who's in your friendship group or to someone who's sitting on the couch next to you. Oh my God, I was only there yesterday. It's very different to post that online when a very real person actually did die, a very real person actually was attacked, because I think it takes the conversation away from what happened and it makes the conversation around yourself. Now, this isn't an isolated case. I mean, like I said, any great tragedy, we think about Samantha Murphy, who was murdered when she went out for a run, and the amount of people who reflect that back to saying, well, I run in the mornings and that could have happened to me. I don't know if we need to have this personal self-reflection of putting ourselves in the situation of something in order to have empathy for it, especially, and I think it's okay when we do it on a personal level, when we do it with our friends, but I do think it's problematic when media outlets start doing it and when media representatives start doing it as well. And so that was something that stood out to me as being just, I don't know, the way in which we report on great tragedies now, that has shifted from the way in which we used to speak about it.
I think something else that was quite disturbing over the weekend was the immediacy of which videos were shared on X or Twitter. There were videos of victims of this horrendous attack and they were posted so quickly that there wasn't even time to identify the victims and let their families know. If that was your loved one, you would have recognized the outfit that they were wearing. Look, I don't want to point the finger at any one person. I think that this type of thing is the type of thing that we need to look at as a collective society. And I also don't want to point the finger at anyone who, posted a photo of Ash with her daughter as the photo that they led the Instagram post with, or, that were giving updates on the situation. I know that it's a product of what you've become used to having to provide people. And I don't know how we put the brakes on this, because now we live in a society that is so desperate for immediate information. It almost doesn't matter whether it's true or not, and it almost doesn't matter whether it's been given the grace or the approval of the people who are directly affected by this.
Yeah, and in saying that, Ashley's family came out and they had expressly asked for photos of Harriet to not be shared. And at the same time, media outlets across Australia was still sharing the photo of Ash and Harriet as like the headline image that was supporting the article. It goes to show that like the incentive of many media companies, and I would say all media companies to be honest, it's not about what's best for the victims and the victims' families. It's about what gets the most clicks. And there's this incredible quote from Denzel Washington, which I'll put in here, but it's all about how with media and a lot of reporting, it doesn't matter if you're right straight away. It matters to be first, because the news cycle is a business. And as much as it, on one hand, is to keep us up to date and to keep us informed on what's happening in the world, it also is to be the first to the pit with that story. And I guess there's a really gross grey area where we start putting into a mixing melting pot. But I just love to like put that little quip of the Denzel Washington quote in here, because it really, this is from 2 years ago, but it has never been more true.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed.
So what do you do?
That's a great question. What is the long-term effect of too much information? One of the effects is the need to be first, not even to be true anymore. So what a responsibility you all have to tell the truth, not just to be first, but to tell the truth. We live in a society now where it's just first. Who cares? Get it out there. We don't care who it hurts. We don't care who we destroy. We don't care if it's true. Just say it. Sell it.
Yeah, The Guardian has already published an article that is related to what we're talking about here, Laura. The title of it is "False Claims Started Spreading About the Bondi Junction Stabbing Attack as Soon as It Happened." I think we've been really desensitized to the sensitivities that we should provide people in these circumstances. And because of that desensitization, I also think that people have taken it upon themselves to kind of look, I don't know if they do this because it's easier to put the pieces of a puzzle together because you want to make sense of it, and because there can be some type of closure that may come from trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Like the incident on Saturday will never make sense. There will never be a reason that I think is like, oh, that's why that happened. It's just so completely fucked. And so I understand like the human nature to want to make sense of this and say, why did this happen? And how did this happen? And we want information on this person. But so much of what was reported on Saturday afternoon was incorrect. It was misinformation. People's commentary and their opinions and their initial assumptions were being reported on as though they were facts.
I mean, what you're mentioning, Keisha, the Guardian article that has come out, it talks about the Islamophobic and anti-immigration comments that were circulating as soon as it happened. It was almost as though as soon as the photo of the murderer was released, it gave people license to start making up their own minds as to what might be the motivation. And so much of that commentary was religious-based, which I think really contributes and shows the level of racism that exists within our society. It's now been reported on that the motivator was that he walked into the shopping centre with the intention of attacking women, and that they were the main target. There's been more reports on it from people who have investigated the footage. He walked straight past men. He avoided attacking men, and the only man who was murdered was a security guard who got involved to try and stop him. But everyone else and all the other victims were female. Look, there is one part of this Guardian article which I think is worth mentioning because it supports what we're talking about, this idea of like the fight for being first with information. And it says, each tragedy that attracts global attention is now an opportunity for social media accounts to attract followers and revenue off the back of inflammatory claims, or to fit the incident into a predetermined narrative before the facts have emerged. And this weekend was no different. Now, the reason why, I mean, I know we've said that this happens across the board, but it did feel very pointed this weekend with this incident. And it did feel as though that this was rife. And maybe it's because things like this don't happen in Australia. Maybe it's because things like this are rare. And so, as you said, Keish, we're left trying to make sense of something that is absolutely senseless. But I think this was a real example of the media failing the Australian public, and it being a race for sensationalized headlines, for clickbaity headlines, for absolutely trauma dumping what was an incredibly devastating loss of life, especially, and I say especially of Ash because of the magnitude of the fear she must have felt while she had her baby with her. But it felt as though that turned into a very clickbaity headline. And for all of the family and the friends who are affected by this, the rest of Australia as well, we can only imagine just how harrowing this experience has been.
There will be a time that we can examine this and go, okay, what did we as a society do right here and what did we do wrong? We are all mourning, whether you knew these people personally or not. I know that the whole country right now is mourning. Everyone's devastated.
And I think it's so important before we do wrap on this conversation, like acknowledging Amy Scott, the New South Wales police officer who
so brave.
Completely unassisted by a team. She was in this vicinity of the area. She heard what was happening and she ran in by herself. I mean, it wasn't by herself. She was with 3 other people who were just civilians. But there's just such a level of bravery to go and to put everybody else's life above your own and to go into that situation. And for anyone who's not across the story, like I said, if you're listening to this from overseas, but the murderer was shot dead in the shopping centre, and then there's footage of Amy there doing CPR, and she's just such an incredible hero in this instance. And I think for the New South Wales Police, who do often receive such a bad rap, it was such an incredible moment of bravery from her.
For me today, I felt the desire to share that I'm so incredibly proud of our beautiful friend Ash for what she did for her gorgeous daughter. Ash's baby was injured in the attacks as well. And it's being told that her last efforts while she was alive was to protect her beautiful daughter and put her in the arms of 2 wonderful brothers that aided in keeping her alive. And I know that for a lot of people, especially I think for mums, knowing that if they were in the same situation, they would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah.
There were so many acts of bravery and so many acts of kindness towards other people, of helping other people. And
the humanity of it.
Yeah. I think in such an act of disgusting inhumanity, the other side of it is that there's this collectiveness and this sense of wanting to help a stranger. And there were plenty of reports of that. I know that there was a lifeguard from Bondi who went and provided first aid. There was Bollard man who was Ukrainian, and there was another French man who contributed to less people being hurt. I want this to be about the wonderful people who helped in this situation and the innocent people who went to the shops on Saturday afternoon and very tragically have had their lives taken from them. And I want to continue on with this episode because at times like this, we do need to find the joy in life. I guess I just wanted to provide a little bit of context as to why today was a little bit harder, and also switching gears into talking about silly things that are
sex and relationships.
Yeah, like it feels a bit jarring, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. Like, I don't really have an articulate way to say, sorry, this is going to feel weird and this is going to feel like a big step to the left. But, I think that that's reflective of these situations. These things all coexist at the same time, and you're expected to turn up and live your normal life, and you can be going through a really hard process, however that looks for you.
I think it's also reflective of like the podcast that we create. And I think it's part of for me, the privilege, the joy that we get to have incredibly challenging conversations that are so charged with emotions and feelings about things that we feel deeply about. And then we also get to have conversations about things that are silly and light and, that are here to make you guys laugh and to make you feel like, life isn't as heavy as what sometimes it is. And so with that in mind as well, we really did have the very conscious decision around how to structure this episode. And we wanted to talk about what happened in Bondi, but we also still wanted to provide you guys with an episode. So yeah, let's get into the rest of it.
Laura, a couple of days ago, a TikTok went very viral by a creator called Bran_Flakes.
Do you think it's flakes?
I don't know.
Flax.
I'm not sure.
It's a big life conundrum that I think so many of us face at different points, especially if you're organising a wedding.
So he's created this scale of how to know whether it's appropriate to ask, can you bring your partner or can you bring someone along with you?
I also like the way that he's described it. He's like the classic tale of can my boyfriend come, which is a problem that we have all faced, and the idea of like, do you have the self-awareness of what isn't appropriate situation to ask? Because I think the problem is that if you've ever been in a situation where someone who you care about, who you're supposed to be doing something with, whether it's a dinner or whether it's to go to your wedding, has said, oh, can I bring my boyfriend, which one might assume, and when I say boyfriend, I mean partner, but one might assume that that's a new person, right? It's usually when it's in a newer relationship that asking that question should come with a level of self-awareness. However, some people seem to lack that. Some people seem to lack that when they're in their love bubble, they're so entrenched in this other person's life that they think that they should be able to bring them along like they're a wart.
See, I also think that this happens in long-term relationships, like long-term relationships, where there's almost this like natural assumption that you're supposed to...
That you're a twofer.
Yeah, that like an invite to one is actually an invite to two, but that's not always the case.
I don't know if I told you this, and maybe this makes me an asshole. So at our wedding, we were trying to bring the numbers down. So we didn't want to have any more than 80 people at the wedding. The wedding was pretty small and it was pretty intimate. And for Matt and I, that was achievable because we have really small families. Like I don't have any cousins on my dad's side. Matt doesn't have any contact with his dad. So for us, our families are little. So a lot of that number was made up by friends. But then as you go down the tier of the list of friends,
which feels weird to even like.
Well, but it's true. It's true. You, what I mean is that you start with your family, then you go to like your best friends, and then you go to friends who maybe you haven't seen in a while, who you question whether in 5 years' time you'll still be friends with them or not. Like, are they even going to be there? Right? So there was one friend in particular who was like, I had not seen for so long. But at the same time, I was like, they're a really big friend from my past, from my childhood, so I'll invite them. But I'd never met their husband, who they hadn't been with for very long, but they were married. And I didn't get invited to their wedding. So I was like, well, I'm not going to invite the husband because I don't want to have someone I don't know at the wedding. I don't want to be meeting them at my wedding. So I invited her. But and then I think that she was quite ticked off that the husband wasn't invited. And she did message and said, oh, do I have a +1? And I was like, no, it's not on, no. Sorry.
Wait, sorry.
She asked.
You weren't invited to her wedding. You and Matt were not invited.
No, we weren't. We're not invited.
And she had the audacity to ask you if she could.
To be fair, though, it wasn't a away wedding, which then makes it more tricky. She would have had to have come away.
Yeah.
And I get it.
Logistics.
Look, if you don't ask, you don't get in life. But at the same time, I was like, the audacity. No, I'm so sorry. I would love to meet him, but not at my wedding. And so she didn't come, which, you know, surprisingly, I haven't heard from her in years.
I feel like that's how you know you're on the fringe to begin with. So this guy, Bran, he broke it down into the two axes of his determining factors were intimacy and formality. The TikTok is 1 minute 42 seconds. So I'll play a little bit of it for you right now.
My opinion on if it's okay for you to bring your significant other to our plans depends on two things. How formal are the plans? Am I inviting you to my wedding, or am I just asking you if you want to get drinks after work? And how intimate are these plans? Am I inviting you to a big group activity, or am I just asking you to hang out one-on-one? Let's start over here. If I ask you to do something very casual with me, just one-on-one, grab dinner next week, go to brunch, take a walk, and you look me in the eyes and say, okay, can my boyfriend come? You're fucking weird for that. You can't go out for drinks with me for 2 hours without bringing your fucking significant other. I'm sorry, that's codependency to me. Just because you're dating him doesn't mean I have to. Now, if I'm inviting you to go get drinks with me on Saturday and there's a big group of people going, and you're like, hey, can I bring my partner? It's a reluctant yes. Over here, if I invite you to something pretty formal, maybe it's a giant birthday party for myself or a wedding, a ton of my closest friends are going to be there. I personally am inviting your significant other. I am texting you and I'm saying, hey, I'm having a birthday party next week. Please bring your boyfriend. You don't even have to ask. Big formal events, I think you should always offer. Now, this one's a little trickier. It's a formal plan, but it's more intimate. Maybe it's a birthday dinner where there's only 8 seats at the table. Or maybe it's a housewarming or a dinner party. This, I'm just going to say, read the room. If it's my birthday dinner with just friends and even my significant other isn't going, why would you ask if you could bring yours? That's weird. If it's a housewarming party where I invited 10 of my closest friends, just ask me first. I'm probably going to say yes.
So I think it's like this idea of figuring out who are the people, how intimate is it, and how formal is it? And that kind of gives you your sliding scale.
I came up with a couple of different categories.
Keisha's against it. She's like, this does not float.
I just don't think it's the main things that I consider when I question whether I'm going to ask, can I invite my boyfriend or not? The 3 things I like to consider are dynamic, logistics, and reading the room. Bear with me.
People don't always have the ability to read rooms.
Well, a self-awareness is implied.
That's self-awareness.
So dynamic, what I mean by that is, does it change the dynamic? So is it you and I going for brunch, Laura, and I go, hey, can I bring my boyfriend? That changes the dynamic a lot because it's gone from it being you and I to being you, me, and my partner. And it can change the type of conversation that you're
It
going
changes
to have.
everything.
You know, if you're planning an event with, or you're just going to hang out with your 3 best girlfriends and you invite your boyfriend along, the type of conversation is going to be very different amongst those friends, right? So does the dynamic change is my main question. The second question I think is important is logistics. So this can be space, seating, or very importantly, does it cost the person you're asking money by inviting your partner? And that's where I think the weddings come into it. Because when you ask for a +1, it's not just space and seating. It's also the fact that the couple are expected to pay for that person to attend.
Very true.
And I think the third thing to consider is reading the room. And this comes down to things like how long have you been with your partner? How well do your friends know your partner? Is this the first time that you're wanting to introduce them and your friend's going through a breakup? Not appropriate to bring the boyfriend along.
You mean
know?
what's going on in their lives at the time?
Yeah.
I also think, though, that is like a place of consideration, isn't it? Like, where do you want to introduce? If you've started dating someone, because some people can get really caught up in the excitement of a new relationship and then their new partners become almost like a part of them. Like they go everywhere and they do everything together. And we spoke about this recently on the episode we did around how sometimes when people get into relationships, they become kind of crappy friends because they just morph into the relationship. It becomes their identity more than anything. But also I think it's a consideration as to where you want to introduce your new partner to your friends. Do you do it as a casual hangout at a pub? Do you do it over a formal dinner? Is it an event or is it something that you're like, oh, like I'll just bring this person along to? Which I guess like that is a place to kind of navigate depending on how close the group of friends is that you're introducing this new person to.
I think if you follow the rules of dynamic logistics and reading the room, you can do no wrong. But I also think that, like you said, the last one of reading the room does require self-awareness. And I think when you're talking about people who become, you know, a bit too attached with their partner and they kind of expect that everything they go to, their partner's going to come along, I think inherently those people lack a little bit of self-awareness.
Do you know this reminds me though, if you guys haven't listened to the episode we did on askers and guessers, have a chuck that into the Google search of podcasts or wherever you're listening to this and go and find it. We'll link it in the show notes. We did a really great episode, had a really interesting chat around this philosophy of askers and guessers, that there's 2 types of people in life. There's people who ask and maybe that asking, it seems outrageous. It seems as though because think about it. Think about a time where someone has asked you to do something for them. They've asked something of you. They've asked if they could invite their partner to your wedding. And you thought, how dare they? Like the audacity for them to ask me that. And the thing that we got to on that conversation is this 2 types of people. People who see no harm in asking because it's the opportunity for that person to say, oh, actually, no, that doesn't suit me. But some people are so paralyzed by offending someone or by disappointing someone that we feel uncomfortable by being asked something. So we try and make something happen even though it makes us feel awkward or yuck. So I guess in this instance,
Firstly, I love that you're saying we.
because it's you and I.
You already know.
Because we're guessers and Brittany's an asker. Yeah. And so we're very different people. So when we had this conversation, it was really interesting because Britt's perspective on it was like, if someone's asking a question, they're not telling you that you have to do something. Why don't you just say no? And then the end point that we got to in that was like, actually, it's our issue. It's our inability to set good boundaries and say no to things that make us uncomfortable. So I think if you're in a situation where someone who's your friend has asked to bring their partner to something that makes you feel uncomfortable, where you think it's just not time appropriate or venue appropriate or cost appropriate, whatever that looks like, I think it's about self-awareness on the flip side and being able to exercise your boundaries and say, oh, do you know what? I'm really looking forward to meeting them, or I'd love them to come, but unfortunately, here's the reasons why they can't. But some of us really struggle with that. And so we'll just sit through an awkward situation because we don't want to offend the other person.
I think it's because if you are a guesser, you make the assumption that if someone's asking you a question, they've already assumed that the answer is going to be yes.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't ask a question unless you thought the answer was going to be yes. Because
Whereas,
we guess what people expect of us. I didn't know about that concept. And to me, it really actually made things a lot more clear. And it made it easier for me to go, oh, they're not asking me that because they assume I'm going to say yes. They just go, what's the harm in asking?
They're not asking me that because they're a cunt. They're asking me that
You said it, not me.
because they're expecting that I might say no.
They think that if I don't want to do it or I'm unable to for any reason, I'll just say no. But like, I don't know if it's anxiety. That's not how I lived my life up until that point, and I've learned a lot from it. And
Totally.
I've realized that people who are askers don't. I guess they don't ask the question with the intention of putting the pressure on a guesser.
But the problem is a lot of people are people pleasers, and a lot of us who have like some sort of codependency issues, like that puts that type of person or that type of personality trait in a real situation where they don't want to disappoint someone. And so what you can often find is that you can end up doing things or saying yes to things that you really don't want to do. And then you have this deep resentment that you're doing something that you never wanted to do, that you had every opportunity to say no to, but you said yes because you don't like saying no to people. So I guess when you unpack it in that way, you're like, well, who's the real culprit here? Like, who's done the wrong thing? I don't think it's the person that asked. I think it's the person who lacks poor boundary setting, really. And for me, that conversation was such a good mental sort of checkpoint for me where I went, oh, I'm going to just get a little bit braver with saying no to stuff that makes me uncomfortable. I'm going to get a little bit better with my boundary setting.
So I want to apply that to this situation. And let's say that someone's in a position where their friend comes to them and says, can my boyfriend come to dinner on Tuesday night? I know that we're going out with 3 of the girls.
Casual hang, but intimate. So this is described as you are weird. You are weird for asking. That is a weird time to ask.
But how do you respond? Because
send them this.
like in that scenario, my natural reaction would be like, no, why the fuck are you asking? Because I'm a guesser, you know, like I would be like, why are you even asking this? But also, how do I say no to this so that the sanctity of our intimate hangout is protected, but also I'm not offending either them or their boyfriend?
I think you just have to say, like, I was really looking forward to hanging out with you one-on-one, or I was really hoping that we could just spend some time together. There's some things I wanted to, whatever it is. Like, also, it doesn't just come down to that one person or that one situation. You might be in a group of people, and I know that this is a situation for me and for Matt. We have a group of friends, and I'm really close to some of their partners and I barely know some of the other ones, right? And so when we then have like group things at our house, purely from a numbers perspective, there's some people's partners who I want to invite because I'm like, I know Matt will get along with them. I know he'll then have a couple of guys he can bro down with. We're all friends. But then I have to like cherry pick the partners that I'm okay with inviting because there's a few other partners who I just don't know that well. And that seems really unfair. But also I'm like, well, otherwise then we've got to cater for everyone. And then that's a really big group. It's a battlefield, everyone. It's a minefield.
I just feel like there's so much room for awkwardness in this situation, which as a guesser makes me very uncomfortable.
I would love to know if you guys have been in a situation where someone has asked something completely outrageous, like that they could bring their partner to, whether it be a wedding, maybe it was bar mitzvah, christening, I don't know. But I would love to know, what is the most outrageous thing that your friend has asked if they could bring their partner to? Because I think that there has to be a few doozies for this. All right, it's time for Accidentally Unfiltered. I was in the process of selling my car and was waiting for the potential buyer to come over and check it out. While I was waiting, I thought that I would watch some porn and have some self-love time. Why would you do it when you're on such a time limit? When you know someone's coming, why would you say, like, I'm just going to bat this one out?
Maybe she doesn't need long. She knows her body.
True, but also, like, it's just a real bait and switch of moods. Okay, anyway, I got the message that the person wanting to see the car was outside. So I stopped what I was doing and went out to say hello. Hope you washed your hands. Everything was going fine until they turned on my car.
Oh,
The Bluetooth in my car automatically connects to whatever I was listening to last. What was she listening to, everyone?
which was deep moaning and satisfaction.
So blasting through the speaker came the noises of the porno I had just been watching. Needless to say, they did not buy my car.
Oh, that's so uncomfortable. I'm surprised I didn't ask for like disinfectant before that.
Okay, but also like you just shook hands with this person. You're like, oh, really? This has happened so often. This idea of like watching a porno and it getting picked up in Bluetooth. Like, come on, guys. We need to be better. We need to be smarter. Have we taught you nothing on this podcast?
I admire the agility. You've got more agility than what I have to be able to switch gears that quickly. Like, good for you.
Oh, I don't have the energy.
Do you think she should have financially compensated them for it and been like, oh, I'll knock $200 off because you had to experience that.
You're like, sorry, it does that sometimes. The car's got a bug.
Well-
Every so often the car moans if
Yeah.
it's really happy to see someone.
What is the price? Oh, we got another accidentally unfiltered sent through that I thought was funny. It says, the other day I was driving, listening to Life Uncut. Thank you. Represent. Appreciate that. The episode was labelled Blowjob Etiquette. I know this one. It was an Ask Uncut. I didn't realise, but I was speeding and I got pulled over by the cops. I paused my podcast, but didn't even think about the name of the podcast being front and centre on my screen. As the cop was talking to me, he looked into my car and said, interesting podcast, and then gave me a caution.
You're welcome.
I didn't know what to say back, and I just smiled and said, yeah, really awkwardly. I felt so awkward and I couldn't stop laughing.
That's so good. Okay, if it makes you feel any better, so you guys know that we've just started doing all of our episodes up on YouTube, right? Which my dad... my dad, he can't listen to podcasts. He doesn't understand what a podcast is, right? He's got no clue. He always calls it a pod book, which he might be doing that just to insult me. I don't know. But anyway, we did that Diana Nyad podcast last week and the interview, it was amazing. And I knew it would be an interview that my dad would actually enjoy. And because we've got it now on YouTube, I was like, oh my God, I'm just going to send my dad the YouTube link. He's going to be so proud. So I sent him the YouTube link I didn't think it through. I didn't send it to him and said, don't scroll, Dad. I just sent it to him. And now he's going through and he's watching all of the videos. So my dad, my father, Terry Byrne, is now watching Blowjob Etiquette from his daughter, who for 5.5 years I have managed to do this podcast without any of my parents ever paying any attention to the shit I talk about, ever. And now I've just put myself under a microscope.
I feel so uncomfortable for you. We need to think about how we name the episodes from here moving forward.
Daddy Vibes was one the other week as well. Daddy Vibes.
Hey, Tez.
I also sent it to my auntie who's like devoutly Christian. And when we wrote the book, We Love Love, she was not a fan. Let me tell you that. She did not enjoy it. It wasn't a good read for her. There were some things that she learned about her niece that I think she wished she never learned. And I sent her the Diana Nyad episode as well. Still didn't think it through. I kind of just fired off a few messages in the one go. Anyway, she just wrote back and said, listen to the podcast. Thanks for that. And then I was like, did you enjoy it? And she said, the interview was interesting, not the following episodes. And I was like, oh, fucking brutal, Tina.
Tina, stay away from the reviews on
like,
Apple
so
Podcasts.
if there's a bad one that props up, it's my auntie.
We don't need that from you.
Anyway, guys, look, that is it from us. We're not going to do a suck and sweet today. I think it is very evident what everybody's suck is across Australia. So we didn't think that it was appropriate or timely to do that and to have that reflection this week. But we will be back to our normal programming next week. And also we have an amazing interview for you guys tomorrow and Ask Uncut's all coming. So we really appreciate you guys. I mean, if you've made it this far in the episode, giving us the grace and the space to be able to talk about what we did at the beginning of the ep, to talk about the attacks in Bondi, but also to be able to then bring you an episode that had some levity to it in some ways as well. And you guys, if you haven't yet, it is potentially Brit's last week in the African jungle. So if you've been watching now, one person will be going home every night. So it's going to be a very, very quick turnaround now. And I'm pretty sure the last episode is either this Sunday or very early next week. So please get your votes in. 10 votes a day for our girl Brit. And that will hopefully see her through to the final trials.
Yeah, which will have $100,000 going to a very worthy charity. And we're really hoping that not only is Brit crowned the Queen of the Jungle, but that $100,000 could go to Rise Up, which is a domestic violence charity. It essentially mostly helps women and children who are escaping domestic violence situations and puts them into homes that are lovely, you know,
and safe.
Yeah. So,
and guys, that's it for us. You know the drill.
Tell your mum, tell your dad, tell your dog, tell your friends, and share the love because
we love love.